The sun was dipping low behind the jagged peaks, casting the sprawling ranch in long shadows that stretched like dark fingers across the dusty ground. The air carried the scent of hay and leather, mingled with the faint tang of the nearby river. The rancher, a tall, broad-shouldered man with weathered skin and eyes that had seen more hardship than most could imagine, leaned against the porch railing of his wooden house, watching the horizon. He had spent years waiting not for love exactly, but for someone worth the patience, someone who could withstand the loneliness that came with this rugged life. The distant rumble of hooves interrupted his reverie. At first, he thought it might be one of the ranch hands returning from the fields, but the figure approaching was unmistakably different. She rode a chestnut horse with a fluid confidence that spoke of experience, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. Even from a distance, he noticed her sharp eyes, alert and calculating, yet tinged with a vulnerability that piqued his curiosity. When she reached the porch, she dismounted with a grace that betrayed her strength. Dust clung to her boots, and her coat was worn, but there was an undeniable aura of control about her, a sense that she could handle any situation thrown her way. She paused at the bottom of the steps, scanning the ranch as though measuring it, weighing it and him against some unseen standard. "I don't want trouble," she said finally, her voice low, smooth, but carrying a subtle warning. "But you'll regret choosing me." The rancher raised an eyebrow, leaning slightly forward. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. He had heard many warnings in his time from rivals, from the wind-whipped plains, even from the ghosts of past relationships, but there was something in her tone, a combination of certainty and defiance that made him pause. He didn't fear her. If anything, he was intrigued. "I already regret waiting this long," he replied, his voice steady, confident. There was no arrogance in it, just a quiet acknowledgement that perhaps this was the person he had been waiting for. For a moment, silence hung between them. The wind shifted, rustling the dry grass, carrying with it the faint whistle of the river and the distant clatter of cattle. She studied him with sharp eyes, assessing, calculating, but beneath the surface there was curiosity. It was a rare thing, she realized, to find someone who didn't flinch at the warning, someone who met her caution with calm certainty instead of fear or dismissiveness. The rancher stepped down from the porch, closing the small gap between them. He noticed the way her hand rested near the hilt of a knife at her belt, a subtle reminder that she was not to be underestimated. Yet, he did not step back. There was a mutual recognition of strength, a silent understanding that this meeting was more than coincidence. It was the start of something inevitable. As she finally nodded, acknowledging his presence, he offered a hand, not as a gesture of dominance, but as an invitation. She hesitated, measuring the truth in his eyes before taking it. Their handshake was firm, a clash of wills that somehow felt natural, as though the land itself had conspired to bring them together. The sky deepened into shades of violet and gold, shadows stretching longer across the ranch. And for the first time in years, the rancher felt a spark of anticipation that had nothing to do with the work, the land, or the cattle. He felt it stir in the air between them, a fragile, electrifying tension, the kind that hinted at both danger and possibility. He had waited a long time, and now, finally, something or someone had arrived to challenge him. The morning light spilled over the ranch, painting the dusty corrals in gold. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of horses, leather, and the river that ran lazily beyond the pastures. The rancher had already begun his day feeding cattle, checking fences, and performing the small, necessary tasks that kept the ranch running. Yet, even in the routine, his thoughts kept drifting back to her. She moved through the barn with an ease that immediately set her apart. Her hands were strong, calloused from work, but careful and precise. She fed the horses, cleaned the stalls, and organized the tack with a quiet efficiency that spoke volumes of her experience. The rancher watched from a distance, Noting the slight arch of her brow as she inspected the equipment, the way her eyes darted with alert awareness. She was capable, competent, and entirely self-assured, a stark contrast to the few women he had ever known who had stepped onto his land. Yet there was something that unsettled him. Her warning still lingered in his mind. "You'll regret choosing me." It wasn't the type of caution born of shyness or fear. It was deliberate, almost like a challenge. He felt a curious mix of excitement and tension. She was unpredictable, and unpredictability had always been dangerous, but dangerously thrilling, too. Finally, she spoke, breaking the quiet hum of the morning. "You don't usually have visitors out here, do you?" Her voice was smooth, calm, but with a hint of amusement. "No," he replied, pausing in his work to meet her gaze. "Not many can handle it." She tilted her head slightly, a playful smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "I can handle it," she said. It wasn't a boast, it was a fact, stated simply, confidently, leaving no room for argument. The rancher felt the pull of challenge in her words. He had lived a life defined by hard work, by controlling the land and the animals that depended on him. Yet here was someone who didn't shrink from his world. She met it head on, almost daring him to test her. As they worked side by side, a rhythm began to form a tentative cooperation that felt surprisingly natural. She suggested better ways to repair a fence, adjusted the bridle on a restless horse, and offered advice without ever appearing condescending. He found himself respecting her insight, even as he tested her patience with teasing remarks. Every glance, every slight smile, every word carried a subtle undercurrent. They were sizing each other up, both aware of the simmering tension. And yet, amidst the sparks of rivalry, there were moments of softness. A small laugh at an awkward stumble in the mud, a shared glance when a calf refused to cooperate, tiny glimpses that hinted at vulnerability beneath her confidence. The rancher felt the stirrings of curiosity and something more, a feeling he had almost forgotten, the pull of attraction. By midday, the sun was high, casting heat over the plains. The rancher leaned against a post, wiping sweat from his brow, watching her adjust a rope with nimble fingers. She glanced up at him, eyes sharp, and smiled a brief, fleeting expression that carried more warmth than words could convey. And in that smile he felt a promise of possibilities, dangers, and perhaps even a future neither of them could yet imagine. For all her warning and all the tension in her presence, the rancher knew one thing with certainty. This woman would challenge him in ways he hadn't felt in years. She was not just a visitor. She was a force of nature, a puzzle he wanted to solve, and someone who, despite everything, might just belong on his ranch and in his life. The evening settled over the ranch like a velvet blanket, the sky streaked with shades of crimson and purple. A cool wind whispered through the fields, rustling the tall grasses and carrying the faint, sweet scent of wildflowers from the hills. The rancher sat on the porch, a mug of steaming coffee in his hands, watching her move among the horses. There was something in the way she handled them, calm yet alert, that suggested she had been through her share of trials. He had noticed subtle hints before, small traces of a life lived on the edge. A flinch at sudden movements, a sharpened gaze when strangers approached, the faint scars on her hands. But now, as the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, he felt compelled to ask, to breach the walls she had so carefully built. "You're good with them," he said casually, nodding toward the horses. "Not everyone can calm a skittish colt like that." She paused, her hand resting lightly on the nearest stall. Her eyes met his, sharp and guarded, a flicker of something unspoken in them. "I've had to be," she said finally, her voice steady but carrying a subtle edge. "Life teaches you quickly when you can trust someone and when you can't." He leaned back, studying her expression. The shadows of her past were visible now, just beneath the surface. She wasn't reckless or careless. She was shaped by hardship, molded by danger and necessity. Yet there was a resilience there that demanded respect, a strength that matched, perhaps even surpassed, his own. "Seems like you've run from more than just small-town gossip," he said softly, careful not to push too hard. Her eyes flicked away, scanning the horizon. The wind caught her hair, and she tucked it behind her ear, a nervous habit she hadn't shown before. For a long moment she said nothing, and the silence carried the weight of unspoken truths. Then, slowly she spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "I had no choice," she admitted. "There were people, dangerous people. I had to leave everything behind to survive. My past, it's not clean, not like this land. It's messy, dark." The rancher didn't flinch. He had faced his own ghosts, endured solitude, and navigated heartbreak. He knew that someone's past didn't define who they could be today. "It doesn't matter what you left behind," he said quietly. "What matters is who you are now. And right now, you're here. You're standing on this land, facing whatever comes next." Her gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment, the walls around her eyes lowered. "It's hard," she admitted. "Hard to trust. Hard to let people close. I've been burned more times than I can count. I warned you for a reason. You'll regret it if you think I'm easy to handle." He smiled faintly, a warmth in his eyes that she hadn't expected. "I'm not afraid of a little fire," he said. "Besides, I've waited a long time for someone like you. Someone who's strong, someone who doesn't back down. Maybe someone I don't have to fix. Just someone I can stand beside." Her lips twitched into a small, reluctant smile. There was still caution, still wariness, but the tension between them had shifted slightly, no longer just curiosity or intrigue, but a fragile understanding. She realized, perhaps, that he wasn't just a rancher hardened by land and loneliness. He was a man who saw beyond the surface, who recognized strength and resilience in a way few ever had. As night fell and the first stars appeared, the rancher and the woman stood in silence for a moment, side by side. The land stretched endlessly before them, quiet and unyielding, and in that quiet, a subtle bond began to form. Shadows of the past lingered, yes, but the promise of what could be, of trust, of partnership, of something deeper, was beginning to take root. It was the first crack in the armor she had built so carefully, and it was enough for both of them to feel the stirrings of a connection that could grow despite the past. The sky had darkened to a brooding gray by mid-afternoon, clouds rolling in from the mountains with a low, threatening rumble. The wind picked up, scattering dust and dry leaves across the ranch. The woman had been checking the far pasture when the first drops of rain began to fall fat, cold drops that quickly turned into a steady downpour. The rancher was already gathering tools and securing the animals, but he noticed her struggling with a tangled fence line, soaked to the bone and determined to finish the task. "Need a hand?" he called, his voice carrying over the rain. She glared at him, half annoyed, half amused. "I don't need a hand. I need no one telling me how to do my job." He grinned despite the weather. "I'm not telling you how, just offering to help. Don't want the storm to win." After a tense pause, she finally nodded, accepting his presence. Together, they worked, their movements instinctive and coordinated. The wind threatened to topple fence posts, the mud pulled at their boots, and the horses grew restless in the paddocks. Yet somehow, they moved as one, anticipating each other's actions, covering for weaknesses, combining strength and experience. As they struggled with a particularly stubborn post, a sudden crack of thunder startled a horse. The animal bolted, dragging a tangle of fence and rope behind it. She barely avoided being thrown off her feet, and the rancher lunged, catching her arm to steady her. Their eyes met, and in that split second, there was an unspoken acknowledgement. In moments like this, survival depended on trust, on reliance, on the willingness to lean on another person without hesitation. By the time the storm passed, both were drenched, muddy, and exhausted, but something had shifted. She brushed the wet hair from her face, a hint of a smile appearing despite her stubbornness. "All right," she admitted grudgingly. "Maybe you're not completely useless." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I'll take what I can get." The night brought a cold, biting chill that forced them to light a fire in the small barn they had sought refuge in. They sat across from each other, warmth radiating from the flames, drying clothes and sharing silence. The tension from earlier had softened into an uneasy camaraderie. She was still cautious, still measuring every word, every glance, but now there was an understanding that neither could have handled the storm alone. "It's strange," she said finally, her voice low, almost contemplative. "I've spent so long running, surviving. I'm not used to depending on anyone. And yet, today I had to, and I didn't hate it." He nodded, understanding. "Out here, we all rely on each other, whether we like it or not. The land doesn't care about pride. It only cares if you survive. And sometimes, surviving means letting someone in, even if you're scared to." The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows over her face, revealing fleeting moments of vulnerability that had been carefully hidden before. She looked away, blinking back the hint of emotion. "You make it sound easy," she said, though she didn't mean it. "Easy?" he asked, a teasing lilt in his voice. "Nothing worth doing is easy, but worth doing? That's different. Worth doing is when you care enough to risk the struggle." She considered his words, the weight of truth settling over her like the dampness of the storm still clinging to their clothes. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that she didn't have to face the world entirely alone. By the time the fire had burned low, the storm was nothing more than a distant rumble. Outside, the ranch lay soaked but intact. Inside, a fragile bond had formed, built on necessity, resilience, and the realization that sometimes survival demanded more than strength. It demanded trust. And for both of them, that trust, however uneasy, was the first step towards something neither had expected, but both might secretly hope for. The morning after the storm was calm, almost eerily so. The sun rose in a crisp, pale sky, casting a gentle light over the drenched ranch. Puddles glimmered in the fields, reflecting the first hints of gold, and the air smelled fresh, earthy, and full of promise. The storm had passed, leaving a world washed clean, and in its wake, a new dynamic between the rancher and the woman. She moved through the barn with the same precision as before, but now there was a faint smile playing at her lips. She brushed the sweat and rain from the horses' coats, her hand surprisingly gentle. The rancher watched her from a distance, noticing little things he hadn't before. The way she hummed softly under her breath, the care in her touch, and the subtle attention she paid to even the smallest creatures on the ranch. It was a side of her she rarely revealed, a softness that contrasted sharply with the fierce, guarded persona she carried so openly. "Easy there, Buttercup," she murmured to a nervous horse, her voice low and soothing. The animal relaxed immediately, leaning into her palm. The rancher felt a flicker of admiration. Here was a woman who could command respect through strength, yet wield gentleness with equal mastery, a combination rare and captivating. As the day wore on, they worked side by side, sharing small jokes and teasing remarks that chipped away at the remaining walls between them. She teased him about his stubborn insistence on doing things his way, and he laughed at her defiance, enjoying the rare moments when she allowed herself to be light-hearted. Their banter was playful, yet layered with unspoken understanding, a dance of personalities learning each other's rhythms. Later, when she noticed a loose hinge on the barn door, she didn't just fix it. She called him over, saying, "Here, let me show you a trick. It'll last longer this way." He leaned in, watching as she demonstrated, and for a brief moment, he saw her vulnerability, the humility in acknowledging that even she didn't have all the answers. He felt a warmth spread through him. Here was someone unafraid to be capable yet honest, strong yet approachable, someone who could teach him and challenge him in equal measure. During a break, she sat on the porch, wiping her hands and looking out over the fields. He joined her silently, offering a thermos of coffee. "For surviving the storm," he said simply. She accepted it, their fingers brushing briefly as she took it. The contact was fleeting but electric, sending a quiet thrill through them both. She didn't flinch this time. Instead, she smiled, just slightly, acknowledging the connection without words. Later still, they found themselves repairing a fence near the riverbank. She laughed softly when he misjudged a post, and he laughed in return, the sound carrying across the fields. The moment felt ordinary, mundane even, but it was these small gestures, these shared glances and touches, that began to deepen the bond between them. It wasn't about grand declarations or dramatic confessions. It was about trust, subtle care, and the quiet realization that they were beginning to rely on one another emotionally as well as practically. By the time the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the landscape with warm amber hues, the woman leaned against a post, brushing mud from her boots. "You're different than I expected," she said quietly, almost reluctantly. "I could say the same," he replied, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You're not all fire and warnings, are you?" She laughed softly, the sound carrying a mixture of surprise and pleasure. "Maybe not," she admitted. And in that simple acknowledgement, the rancher felt the first real sense of intimacy, the soft, unguarded moments that hinted at something deeper, something worth holding on to in a world as wild and unpredictable as theirs. The calm of the ranch that morning was deceptive. The sun rose, brilliant and serene, but the air carried an undercurrent of unease. The woman moved through the corral, checking fences and watering troughs, but her movements were tense, sharp, her eyes constantly flicking toward the hills. The rancher noticed it immediately, the subtle signs that something lingered in her mind, something unspoken yet palpable. "I keep thinking we're safe," she admitted, pausing to adjust a gait. "But safe is relative." He tilted his head, sensing the weight in her words. "Safe's just a word. What matters is who you have beside you when things go wrong." She looked at him, a flash of something fierce and fearful in her eyes. "It's not just the land," she said, voice tight. "It's people, my past." It doesn't like being left behind. As if to underscore her words, a distant sound broke the quiet, a faint but deliberate disturbance among the cattle. The rancher squinted, spotting movement near the tree line. 3 riders, dust trailing behind them, approaching fast. His heart didn't race, but his instincts kicked in. Danger was near, and they had no time for hesitation. "They're coming," he said calmly, grabbing his rifle. Her hands went to her own weapon, and for the first time he saw the full measure of her past come alive. She moved with efficiency, setting traps, securing animals, and directing him with precision. Together, they orchestrated a defense that was equal parts strategy and survival instinct. The storm from days before had shown them how to work together, but this was different. This was intentional, human, and dangerous. Even as they faced the external threat, internal tension simmered. Their earlier moments of connection now clashed with the raw reality of fear and adrenaline. She resented the thought of endangering him, feeling the weight of her own past mistakes. He grappled with frustration, wishing she would trust him fully, yet respecting her independence. They argued quietly, tension threading through their teamwork. "You can't do everything yourself." He snapped once, but not angrily, urgently, because time was short. She paused, breathing hard, then shot him a glare that was part challenge, part apology. "I know. But I can't just stand by and wait while people from my past, people who mean to hurt me, show up here." "Not again." The riders drew closer, and the urgency left no room for lingering resentment. They moved as one, covering each other's blind spots, anticipating the attacker's movements. She ducked behind a fallen log, signaling him to flank from the left, while he used his knowledge of the terrain to create obstacles and slow the intruders. In those moments, trust wasn't just emotional, it was literal, life-or-death reliance. By the time the riders retreated, thwarted by their quick thinking and intimate knowledge of the land, both were breathing heavily, hearts racing. Mud streaked their clothes, sweat mingled with rain from earlier, and every muscle ached. But more than exhaustion, there was relief and an undeniable spark of admiration. She turned toward him, still holding her weapon loosely, and said, almost softly, "You didn't have to." "Stay." He shook his head, eyes steady, voice low but firm. "Neither did you." "But we did. Together." It was a defining moment, proof that the bond they had begun to form wasn't just emotional, but forged through fire and danger. Yet even as relief settled over them, the unspoken truth lingered. The past didn't forgive easily, and danger was far from over. The ranch, the land, and their fragile trust had all been tested, and in surviving, they had discovered a deeper dependence on each other than either had expected. The night was quiet, almost eerily so, after the chaos of the previous day. The storm had passed, the intruders had vanished, and the ranch lay under a sky studded with stars, serene and untouched. Yet inside the barn, a different kind of tension lingered, the kind that comes not from danger outside, but from truths left unspoken. They sat opposite each other by the small fire they had built to dry their clothes. The woman stared into the flames, shadows flickering across her face, revealing glimpses of vulnerability she rarely allowed. The rancher studied her in silence, sensing the weight of something she had kept hidden for far too long. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and tentative. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said before." He leaned forward slightly, encouraging her without pressing. "Go on," he said quietly. Her hands twisted in her lap. "The people from my past? They're not just strangers. They're dangerous. I was involved in bad things I'm not proud of. I ran because I had no choice. I tried to leave it all behind, but it follows me always. I thought I could handle it alone, but—" Her voice faltered, and for a moment she looked like the woman who had whispered warnings days before, fragile, human, real. He didn't flinch, didn't recoil. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing lightly against hers. "It doesn't change anything," he said firmly. "Your past isn't who you are now. It's just a part of your story. What matters is this right now here with me." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I warned you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I told you you'd regret choosing me. I didn't think anyone could handle all of this." He shook his head, a small, tender smile forming. "I've waited a long time," he said softly, "for someone who's strong, who's been through hell and still stands. Someone I don't have to fix. Just someone I can stand beside." The weight of his words seemed to lift some of the burden she had carried for years. She studied him, really looked at him, and for the first time allowed herself to feel safe in his presence. I don't know if I've ever trusted anyone like this," she admitted. "Then start now," he said simply. "Trust isn't easy. It doesn't come all at once. But it begins with choosing to stay, choosing to face whatever comes next." Together. A long silence fell between them, but it was different this time, not awkward, not tense, but full of understanding. She allowed herself a small, genuine smile, the kind that reached her eyes and softened her usual edge. "Maybe. I can try," she said, almost to herself. He nodded, meeting her gaze steadily. "Good, because I don't plan on going anywhere." For the first time, the past didn't feel like a chain, a weight dragging her down. Instead, it was just a part of the journey that had led her here, to him, to this land, and to a chance at something real. And in the quiet barn, lit by flickering flames and the steady presence of each other. They found more than just temporary comfort. They found the beginnings of trust, hope, and perhaps even love. The stars outside twinkled brightly, silent witnesses to the unspoken promise forming between them. The rancher and the woman, once guarded and wary, now sat side in a fragile but growing bond. Each had revealed truths that could have driven them apart, yet instead it drew them closer. Together, they were stronger, braver, and more willing to face the unknown that awaited on the horizon. The morning dawned heavy and gray, clouds clinging low to the peaks, the air charged with tension. The tranquility that had briefly settled over the ranch was shattered by the sound of gunfire in the distance. The riders from her past had returned, this time in greater numbers, armed and relentless. Their goal was clear: intimidation, control, perhaps even vengeance. The rancher and the woman knew that this confrontation would determine not just their survival, but the safety of everything they had come to care for. "Stay close," the rancher ordered, voice calm but firm. His hands gripped his rifle with a practiced ease, his eyes scanning the terrain for advantage. She nodded, her jaw set, her hand hovering near her weapon. "We've handled worse," she said, though the tension in her voice betrayed a sliver of fear. But she did not flinch. Fear was familiar to her. Courage was a choice. The first wave of attackers came over the ridge, the sound of galloping hooves echoing across the valley. The rancher took careful aim, picking off the lead rider with precision, while she moved swiftly to flank the others, her movements fluid and deliberate. Together, they became a single, unyielding force, each anticipating the other's actions without words, relying entirely on trust and instinct. As the fight escalated, a rider broke through the corral, heading straight for the herd. Without hesitation, the woman leapt in front of the animal, guiding it to safety while simultaneously disarming the attacker. The rancher covered her, the steady rhythm of their teamwork forming an unspoken bond that needed no explanation. Every move, every breath, every glance reinforced the connection that had been growing for weeks. At one point, she stumbled on loose ground, and the rancher caught her before she fell. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting second, time slowed not for the battle raging around them, but for the unspoken acknowledgement that they were stronger together. "Don't let me die," he said, half teasing, half serious. "I won't," she shot back, determination blazing in her eyes. "Not while you're here." The attackers were relentless, but the rancher and the woman were strategic, using the terrain to their advantage. Fallen logs, fences, and steep embankments became tools of defense. They moved with synchronization, covering blind spots, anticipating ambushes, and ensuring the safety of the animals. It was chaos, but amidst the chaos, their bond tempered by trust, respect, and shared danger was unbreakable. By midday, the remaining attackers had fled, either wounded or realizing they could not overpower the pair. The rancher and the woman stood among the aftermath, trampled grass, scattered debris, and a herd slowly returning to calm. Both were exhausted, their clothes torn and mud-streaked, but there was a fierce satisfaction in their survival. She lowered her weapon, breathing hard, and looked at him. "We made it," she said, voice soft but steady. He nodded, a tired smile tugging at his lips. "We did, together." For the first time, there was no warning in her eyes, no hesitation in her stance. They had faced danger, fear, and the shadows of the past and emerged not just alive, but stronger. In that crucible of chaos, they had discovered something undeniable. Their connection was no longer tentative or fragile. It was forged in fire, tested by danger, and proven unbreakable. As they surveyed the ranch, the quiet returned, this time permanent. The storm of attackers was gone, but the bond between them remained, deeper and more certain than ever. For the first time, both understood that survival wasn't just about the land or the animals, it was about the people beside you. And here, In this rugged frontier, they had found their person. The morning after the chaos was calm in a way the ranch hadn't known in years. The sun rose slowly, spilling warm light over the fields, illuminating the repairs made overnight and the traces of the previous day's struggle. Birds sang in the trees, their songs a gentle reminder that life continued, steady and persistent. The rancher walked along the fence line, inspecting the damage, while the woman followed closely, quietly helping where she could. They moved in sync now, not because of obligation, but because of the rhythm forged through shared danger. Every glance, every nod, carried unspoken acknowledgment of the trust and dependence that had grown between them. There was no need for grand declarations. Their actions spoke louder than words ever could. When a stubborn gate refused to close properly, she muttered under her breath and bent to fix it. He stood behind her, silently offering support, and she caught his eyes. For the first time, there was no tension, no defensive edge, just respect. "You've got a way of making people rely on you," she said softly, a hint of admiration in her tone. "And you've got a way of making people trust you," he replied, matching her quiet intensity. "I didn't think I'd meet someone who could handle all of this, me, the land, the chaos, and still stand strong." She smiled, small and genuine, the kind of smile reserved for moments of truth and connection. "I didn't think I'd meet someone who could handle me," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Not all the baggage, not the past, but I was wrong." For the first time, the rancher allowed himself to step closer, closing the space between them without hesitation. "Neither did I," he said simply. "It's not about waiting or fearing. It's about knowing when you found someone who belongs beside you." They stood there for a long moment, the wind playing softly through the tall grass, carrying with it the sense of earth, animals, and the faint trace of rain from days before. The connection between them, tested through storms and danger, had settled into something solid, something both could count on. Respect and admiration had evolved into a deep, undeniable bond, the kind that required no grand gestures, only the quiet understanding that comes from shared struggle and survival. The woman's eyes softened, a vulnerability she rarely showed surfacing again. "I wasn't sure anyone could handle the real me," she whispered. "But you did. And I think I can finally believe that it's not a mistake being here with you." He smiled, a warmth in his gaze that made her heart skip. "It's never a mistake," he said. "It's exactly where we're supposed to be." The afternoon sun bathed the ranch in gold as they worked together on small repairs, side by side, talking lightly, laughing softly, and sharing quiet looks that spoke volumes. It was mundane, simple, and yet profound, an ordinary day infused with extraordinary trust and connection. The battles were over, the threats receded, and what remained was the mutual respect and understanding they had earned through fire, danger, and truth. By the time evening arrived, they were seated on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. The ranch stretched before them, serene yet full of life and possibility. And in that tranquil moment, both realized something essential. They didn't just survive together, they thrived together. The rancher reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, and she didn't flinch. Instead, she let herself lean into the gesture, a small but telling sign of trust. In that quiet, shared space, they understood that respect, admiration, and partnership were not just ideals, they were theirs, earned and solidified through every storm, every moment of honesty between them. For the first time in years, the rancher smiled without reservation. He had waited, yes, but waiting had brought him exactly where he needed to be. And beside him the woman returned the smile, knowing she had found not just safety, but someone who truly saw her and would stand by her through whatever came next. The ranch lay quiet under the soft glow of the setting sun, golden light spilling across the fields and glinting off the river that wound lazily through the property. The air was warm, carrying the scents of hay, horses, and the faint smoke from the evening fire. The chaos, storms, and threats of the past days felt like distant echoes, replaced by a deep, abiding calm. The woman leaned against the porch railing, her boots dangling just above the ground, while the rancher sat beside her, sipping from a tin mug. There was no need for words. Both felt the satisfaction of survival, the comfort of shared strength, and the subtle thrill of a bond that had grown stronger than either had dared to hope. She broke the silence with a teasing smile, her eyes glinting. "You know, I still think you'll regret choosing me," he chuckled, a low, warm sound, shaking his head. "I already regret waiting this long," he said, his smile softening into something tender, sincere. "But choosing you? That's the only thing I've ever gotten right." Her laugh was light, genuine and unguarded, carrying across the porch like a melody she hadn't allowed herself to share before. She glanced at him, and in that moment, the warning she had given when they first met seemed almost absurd, harsh words from a woman who had feared being vulnerable. Now she understood the truth of his patience, his unwavering strength, and the quiet way he had made space for her to trust him. "I still can't believe it," she whispered, leaning closer, letting her shoulder brush against his. "After everything. After all the danger. We're here." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "We're here because we faced it together," he said softly. "Every storm, every threat, every secret, it all led us here. And now, we don't have to face the world alone anymore." For a moment, the ranch seemed to hold its breath. The wind softened, the horses grazed quietly, and the sky deepened into shades of violet and rose. The woman let herself relax into the moment, the tension that had defined her life for so long dissolving in the presence of someone who had proven steadfast, patient, and unwavering. "I've waited so long to trust someone," she admitted quietly. "I didn't think it was possible anymore." "Then don't think anymore," he replied, smiling gently. "Just live this moment. With me." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining naturally, a simple yet profound gesture of unity. They sat together, watching the sky darken into night, the first stars glimmering above. In that quiet, there was laughter, warmth, and a tenderness that neither had allowed themselves before. As darkness fell, they finally rose together, walking slowly toward the barn where the animals had been secured. Side by side, they moved with a familiarity and ease that had only grown from shared struggle and trust. Every glance, every touch, every shared smile carried the weight of what they had endured and the promise of a future they could build together. Finally, the woman turned toward him, a playful smirk returning to her lips. "You might just be the only man brave enough to handle me." He lifted his eyes to hers, expression soft but certain. "I've waited long enough," he said. "I'll handle you, and I'll handle us. Together." The stars above twinkled, silent witnesses to the unspoken vow between them. In that rugged, isolated land, they had discovered love, trust, and commitment, not through grand gestures, but through survival, honesty, and unwavering partnership. Their pasts had tested them, danger had forged them, and now, in the calm after the storms, they had found something lasting. Hand in hand, they walked back to the porch, the night wrapping around them like a promise. For the first time in years, both felt a rare certainty. They had found their person, their home, and the kind of love that could endure anything.